about what is happening from the outside to your application. Before we go a little deeper into the demo and how we are going to set up the code, let us see at the high level how exactly it works. So we are familiar with this term called as role. So on the Windows Azure virtual machine, that is role instance, we have a role. It could be web role, VM role, or it could be worker role. So let us hope that that is the role which we have. On the same role instance, so this box is representing as a virtual machine. And this is box which is actually a process which is running that role, web role or worker role. So when we start, the role instance starts, and then the diagnostics monitor starts. And this is the different process. You can see it's a separate process. It's called as diagnostics monitors. Then the binding between the role and diagnostics monitor is done through the configuration. So we say monitor is configured, and there are multiple ways to configure that monitor. There could be imperatively at start time, if you write a specific code, then you can do that remotely using PowerShell command scripts or some other code. And this configuration, whatever we change, okay, or whatever we put down, it is stored in the storage, in the blob. We'll see where it is stored. And that is what actually makes the role, that is what makes the diagnostics monitoring accessible to the role by using the configurations. And when we start logging the information, or when you start tracing, providing the trace information from the role, that whole information is actually stored or buffered locally. When I say locally, inside this virtual machine, which is running the Windows Azure Web or Worker role. And this local directory storage is transferred to storage of Azure using this diagnostics monitor process. And this transfer, there are two ways to do this transfers. You could do that on demand. I mean, you can explicitly call some method or some code on the diagnostics monitor, either remotely or with some other process running on the same virtual machine, or you can schedule it when we configure about a monitor. When we configure our diagnostics monitoring configuration, you can say that every 1 minute, every 2 minutes, I want to transfer this local directory storage, which is nothing but your diagnostic information, to storage, and we can provide what account and what storage account which we want to transfer to. As of now, this information is always transferred to Windows Azure storage, and there are mechanisms by which you can write your own trace listeners and transfer it to any other storage wherever you want. Interesting point to note here is it can be scheduled or it could be on demand. On demand means you explicitly call a method saying that now transfer the logs. How does it work? Again, we are just seeing it in a little detailed way. So here you have Azure VM instance, then you have a web or worker application which is logging to your local storage, that is trace, file and counters, and this diagnostic monitoring service is always running, and it is getting this information and it's transferring that information to Azure storage. And if you look at it, depending on the type of log which has been captured from the log, it will either transfer to the blob or respective tables. So there are multiple tables which it uses for logging the information. The most generally used one is WAD logs table. This is Azure table where the standard logging which we do, like system.diagnostic.trace.log trace or information, that will be passed to WAD logs table in Azure storage. WAD performance counters table, as the name indicates, is a separate table for capturing performance counters like memory usage, CPU usage, etc. And this will be transferred by diagnostics monitoring service to these tables. The idea here is in our application we just have to mention that I want to capture this information, and then everything else diagnostic monitor will take care, transfer to the Azure storage. We don't have to worry about it. So that was inside the application. And what happens when we want to do the remote configuration? As we discussed, it is a very important part in cloud kind of environment. We should be able to remotely configure our diagnostics configuration or diagnostic monitoring information. So look at this. So this was a role instance which we already looked at, and imagine we have some diagnostic configuration already configured, and it is able to do all the transference and everything is working fine. Now I want to do it from outside the cloud. I want to remotely configure it. as I already mentioned, that this configuration information is always stored in the database, that is Azure storage, in a blob. So that is your information. You can access it remotely. Either you can download, change, and upload it, or there are PowerShell commandlets, PowerShell scripts, or PowerShell commandlets available to modify it using secured certificate access to that. So you modify that information and you upload it again to the database, that is blob. And your diagnostics monitor is always polling that storage to see if there is any change in the configuration. There is any change in that configuration file. If there is any change in the configuration file, it will pull that file onto the diagnostics monitor and configure itself accordingly. And see here, you can see here that poll interval will actually take the file and put it onto the role. So it configures the role to behave according to the new changes which are done, and it will update itself. And next time onwards, you'll start monitoring the diagnostics as per what you have configured from remotely. So that is a very important part of Azure Diagnostics. After talking about how to remotely configure it, let us come back and see what are the ways or mechanisms by which we can configure the diagnostics. The first one is enable programmatically using there's a class, static class called as diagnostics monitor.start method. So before that, we can actually set up the configuration parameters, saying that I want to monitor the logs, I want to monitor event logs, I want to monitor performance counters, and those kind of information. And then you can call a method called as diagnostics monitor.start. You can also do that specifically on a role instance. So there is another class called a role instance diagnostics manager, which is for a role instance basis. So you'll have to do that once the basic default configuration is done. You can actually do that on the role instance also, and you can do that declaratively too. So there is a XML configuration file which is recently, I think it was introduced in 1.3, yeah, 1.3 SDK. So you can actually use this XML file and keep it along with your role deployment bin folder, and the role will actually start taking that configuration from the diagnostics.cfg file. This file is very useful in terms of VM roles, because in VM roles there is no startup or on role start method which we get access to. So for VM role, the only mechanism to configure your diagnostics is to use this diagnostics.cfg file. And there are lots of diagnostics tools to do it from outside and monitor or get an all large information from table storage. So tools like Azure Ops, which is a third-party tool, Azure MMC, this is available on Codeplex, Operations Manager, Cerebeta. There are a few open source free products, or some of the tools are actually available. We have to pay for that. So if you need to get Azure Ops trial, you can visit on the site Opstella, and a very powerful tool to do that kind of thing. Let us see how we do the diagnostics monitoring configuration on role startup. So the very first thing what we do is we get the default initial configuration of the diagnostics monitor. We are going to see this code in Visual Studio also. But I just want to set the context here so that we understand how things are going to work. So once I get this diagnostics monitor configuration, so default initial configuration, then for this class I have a lot different properties. Like in this case, I'm just working on Windows event log. And I'm saying that in Windows event log, I'm bothered about application logs. And in the second line, I'm saying that I want schedule transfer log level filter is error. It means I want to only transfer. So when it captures in the local information, it will capture everything. But when I want to just transfer the errors, I don't want to transfer everything and store it unnecessarily. That is what you configure here, scheduled transfer log level filter, and we call it error. And then the third thing is how frequently you want to transfer that. So here we'll see the best practices, but here we are saying Windows log scheduled transfer period is 5 minutes. Once you configure this configuration, and then you say that diagnostic monitor start, and you talk about the connection strings. You pass the connection string of your diagnostics storage, where the whole information is going to be transferred in the Azure. So this is nothing but Azure connection string. And this is the configuration which we have already changed here, diagnostic monitor configuration, which we are passing here. So this is a common pattern for all the different configuration information. We either get the default initial configuration, and on that we modify that default configuration, saying that no, I want to log, I want to add these data sources, or I want to use these logs, and this is the filter level, or this is the scheduled transfer time. It's a common pattern. As an example here, it's a role startup. I can see that start the default configuration, we get some default configuration, and then here this common block determine what to log and when to transfer to storage, and this will remain most of the time same for different kinds of logs which you are going to capture, and then you just start the miner. So that was in the role startup thing. Now outside the role startup thing, if you want to do from any other code block or any other process, anytime when your web role is started and is running fine, we have to use the role instance diagnostics manager. So what we do here is we get the storage account that is used for diagnostics manager or diagnostics connection string, and then we get a new role instance diagnostics manager. We pass the storage account, we pass the deployment ID, role name, role instance ID, all these are available as a role environment parameters, and then we get the configuration for that, and then we configure a role instance saying that, you know, I want to add this application, and then you can change the scheduled transfer time and other information. The change here is you have to set the current configuration. In initial role startup, we were actually doing just diagnostics monitor start. It's a small difference. We generally do not suggest using role instance diagnostics manager unless there is no other way of doing it. So we get the role instance diagnostic manager, then we get the current configuration for that, we modify it, and then we just change it. So set current configuration is going to change that configuration file which is stored in the block. And then diagnostics manager, diagnostics monitor service is going to on every some small interval holds that information. When it says there's a change, when it sees there's a change in that configuration file, it is going to apply to the role. So before we go to the code, let us understand some of the properties. So there is overall quota in MB. So when you configure the diagnostics monitoring, you have, so it is always stored in the local storage first, local resources. So we have to configure saying that how much of the overall quota I want to use for that, for overall logging or overall configuration monitoring. And there could be buffer quota in MB. This is per source, for event logs, for directories, for files, and etc. So we have to do that independently. And then scheduled transfer period in minutes, or you can just use that in seconds also. Then log level filter, which we have already seen this. You could also do that for Windows event logs, performance counter, or directories, like we'll see the directory information very specifically. And now the good part, let us go back to demo. So with that information, let us see. So I already have an application, but just to set the context right, I'm going to create a new cloud project. So I start my Visual Studio in administrator mode. I have Windows Azure SDK 1.6 installed on my machine, and I'm going to create a new cloud project. So I say file, new. This is just for the benefit of people who have never created any cloud project. So you can just say file, new project, and here you have to select cloud, and here you say Azure Diagnostics TechGig demo. Once you do create that Windows Azure project, it is going to ask what is the role which you want to use. So here I am just selecting ASP.NET Web role, and I will say Diag Web role. You can just change the name, and I can say OK. So once I do this, so once the solution gets set up, by default, Windows Azure Diagnostics is enabled. Okay, so it will start capturing the log, and it will start transferring that with the basic default configuration, which is done for every role. So this is a very interesting point. In sometimes, if you are not aware of this point, you will see lots of information captured and stored in your Azure Table storage, which might cost, which is going to cost you money, because every transaction to your storage is charged. So unintentionally, you might be actually using your storage and transactions. So to always remember that by default it is enabled. I'll just show you where it is enabled. So I right click on this Diag web role, okay, before I start this. So this is your Windows Azure project service, Azure Diag TechGig demo, which has role and which has all these configuration files, csdef and cscfg files, and then web role. I assume that most of the people are aware of this basic structure of Azure. So I go to properties of this web role, and you'll see here this enable diagnostics checkbox is checked, and it is using the development storage for transferring the diagnostics. Very important point. We should remember that it is by default enabled. Sometimes you might just forget about this whole thing, and you'll get at the end of the month you'll see a lot of information and a lot of bill on your account for storage and transactions. Okay. Visual Studio, cool. So I just want to ignore an application. I'll come to a sample application which I already have, and okay, I think I'm running short of memory. Okay. So here is the role, and before I start, if I go to this service definition file, you will see this module called as diagnostics module. So modules are inbuilt mechanism of instructing Windows Azure to do some specific tasks. So this diagnostics module is actually going to start when the role starts. It is going to start the diagnostics monitor EX on the virtual machine, and it will take the configuration. It will start monitoring your application and transfer the log. So this is what the module is all about. By default, it is enabled. Then there is one more setting called as you can actually make it anything, but for understanding purpose, it's Microsoft.Windows Azure plugins.diagnostics.connection string. So this makes use of this storage account. As of now, I'm using development storage so that we can see the data quickly. So all the diagnostic information will be transferred to this connection string. You can change the name, but by default, when we enable this module, diagnostics module, it adds this connection string in here. Okay. So once that is done, let's see in my web role, I have webrole.cs, and we'll see how do I configure the diagnostics. So on start, I'm just calling a method called as configure diagnostics, and in the configure diagnostics, I'm taking the default initial configuration. We have already seen this line of code in PowerPoint presentation. So this static class diagnostic monitor is going to give me the default configuration, and then if I see here in the configuration, you'll see all different types of configurations which we have, like logs, and it has a property called overall quota in MB, performance counters if I want to add, Windows event logs if I want to add. You can actually do some custom directories also, and there is a diagnostics infrastructure logs. There are different kinds of logs which we can capture. For the first initial demo, let us see. I'm using logs here. So logs is nothing but system.diagnostics.trace. So this is, I'm saying configuration.log, but scheduled transfer period is 1 minute. Okay, so I want to transfer it 1 minute for the sake of demo. I'll just make it from seconds, and I'll say 5 seconds just to see quickly the information in the log. And here the log level filter, this is where I was talking about. Initially, generally we'll see errors, and then in case when we want more information, we'll see verbose or information. As of now, I'm just keeping it undefined because I'm running it in local environment, so that I want to see everything logged in there. Once I set this up, I'm just trying to add only logs, basic logs in here, and then I say diagnostics monitor at start, and this is the connection string which I want to use. As of now, we are using development storage, and I pass this configuration which I already got as a default configuration. Very simple and basic code to start this. For demo purpose, what I'm doing is in the default.aspx load, I'm saying system.diagnostics.trace information. I think we have been using this for a long time now in .NET, in ASP.NET or Windows applications. I'm saying here just trace the information, and I'm saying default page being loaded and passing the date time UTC now. That's all. Simple logging mechanism. So we'll see what happens now. So before I go here, this is my tool, Azure Storage Explorer. If you might be using some other tool, but this is available on Coldplex, a free tool which will be useful for accessing the table storage related information, blob and cube. So there are a few tables like where logs table, very important one. which we talked in presentation. All these logs, system.diagnostics.traces and information will be passed to. Okay, somebody asked something. Okay, sorry. So this tool can be used for tracing that information, looking at the logs and everything. As of now, this bad logs table do not have any record. Even if you delete this, it will get created by the diagnostics pointer service. So you don't have to really manually create it. And so there is nothing as of now. The point is there is no information in this WAD logs table. Then we go to blob and there is a WAD control container. So we'll see this also. So let us first concentrate on WAD logs table. So as of now, I query, there are no records in here. Now I want to run this application on the local environment. So from my system tray, I just access this compute emulator, and it should show me something like this. So this is my Windows Azure Compute Emulator. It is available only for the local debugging purpose, local running Windows Azure application locally. So once I run this, you would see here that the application is deployed. As of now, this is the name of my web role, diag testing, and this is my instance 0. Had I multiple instances, 0, 1, and all those kind of instances will appear here. This is the basic diagnostics information which is being shown on this screen, on this command, on this monitoring screen. Basically what it is doing is it is actually initializing and passing all this information. You can see on this log, web WA webhost.exe default page being loaded. Okay, this is the log which is actually coming to this local resource and which will get transferred to the table. We'll see in a minute. But before that, let me just refresh this page so that we call that event again and again, and we keep logging that. We'll come in here and you can see here. So the default page being loaded is this is a UTC time. Okay. We'll see a small delay because it is an asynchronous process. So these logs you can see in here. Now if I go to the table, WAD logs table, we'll see if there is any information on this, the logs being transferred or not. So I'm transferring it every 5 seconds and I should see something here. Okay, let us look at this. So the partition key, it is actually a tick count, reverse tick count with max value minus the current time, which is done by diagnostics pointer itself. We don't have to worry about this. Then in the row key, what it does is it actually uses the deployment instance ID and the web role ID and the instance ID. Timestamp, event tick count, deployment ID, and the role. Okay. Here, as of now, I am having only the one instance, so that's why it is saying role instance is 0. Had I configured it for multiple instances, you would have seen role instance 1, 2, and all those kind of things. We'll see that also. And this is the actual message, which says the default page being loaded at this time, and this is the event which is coming. So this is how you can see the basic logging in your table. The best part is, or you can say, not very best part, but you don't have control on what this role instance ID and partition key and everything. It is done by diagnostics pointer. We just have to bother about the message which we want to transfer there and the level depending on the information and trace and etc. Here, as we say, it's a distributed environment. Okay, so as of now, we just see web role in 0. If I say multiple roles, we'll see one more instance here. We'll come back to that. We'll make the 2 instances. But before that, so this is blob WAD control container. It has a file. So I'm just opening this deployment ID file, the latest one, which is used for my file. So it has a text file. So this text file actually has my configuration, diagnostic configuration information. And this is what I was talking about. So you can actually change this information, and it will start changing that in its role configuration. Like for example, it is saying overall put in MB. Then what we are actually logging. You can see here scheduled transfer period in minute. I am set 1 undefined. This is the default file. Okay. Now, since I am doing that role, I'm changing that information on the role start. That code level block will take precedence over this file. But if I want to change it, I can remotely change it, and it will start pulling this information from the file, and it will update the monitoring information, diagnostics monitoring information. So that is WAL control container. Now let us go back to the application, and this time so that was about log, standard logs. Now if I were to log in file, text file, let us do this. So if I am doing file logger, I have some code like file logger log to file. I'm just passing server map path, standard ASP.NET code. The reason I'm using map path is because I want to handle both the situations. So this is my standard ASP.NET code. So I create a log.txt file and log to the text file. But if we log this to the text file, we don't have access to the basic directories directly in Azure. So what we have to do is, we have to, just for understanding purpose, I had commented this. So I'm just checking if this application, this code is running on Azure or not. Okay, it will actually handle a lot of situations like this. If you want to write a code which is compatible on Azure, at the same time it should be running on standard ASP.NET. You can use this variable called as role environment or is available property. What I'm saying here is, if the role environment is available, it means it is running on Azure. Instead of actually taking that basic folder, I am accessing the folder using get local resource. We have seen this in one of the sessions earlier, in one of my sessions. So what it does is, it actually gets the local resource, the name of the local resource is my logs, and I take the root path. It is nothing but a basic directory which it is going to create. Now, just a quick recap on this. This is how you configure a local resource. You just say the name of the local resource, my logs, and you can just say what is the size in MB. And that is what precisely we are doing in here. We are accessing that local resource. The root path is nothing but the directory path as per how Azure is going to create it. Everything else remains same. Now, if I do this logging, it is going to create some log text file, log.txt file in my local machine, wherever this Azure virtual machine is. But I want to transfer this to the blob, because I am not going to access this file from that virtual machine directly. I need access to that file. So what Diagnostics Monitor does is, it will transfer this file from the Azure virtual machine to the blob storage. To make it do that, we have to provide some configuration information here. That is this information. This is file logs. What I say here is local resource. I'm just getting the my logs. So wherever that local resource is, it has its own directory system, direct file access mechanism in Azure. It's nothing but only the file directory location. I'm saying that get this local resource, and I'm just using this the same configuration which we got here, default configurations. Before starting the diagnostics matter, I'm saying for this configuration I want directories also be transferred. So the scheduled transfer period for directory is minutes. I'm just changing it to from seconds, and I'm going to make it 5, just for simplicity. And I say which directory. So I'm saying directory configuration. Okay, I want this whole information to be transferred to a custom block container called as WAL custom block container. You can give it any name, but for this demo purpose, we are using WAL custom block container. And then there's the directory quota and the path. So this path is nothing but my local resource root path. And then I'm just adding that to the configuration directories. The idea here is you have a local resource, and you have a folder structure to that. So what you say is, you say, okay, directory configuration, I want to create a container in blob in Azure storage. The name of the container you provide the quota, and then you say which folder I want to take from a local virtual machine and put it into the Windows Azure storage. This is what this code is doing all about. Okay, and that's all. Once you set up this configuration, you should see the text file in there. So we'll see that quickly. So before I run this again, I want to make the instance count as 2, so that we understand. We have said that it is a distributed environment, cloud is a distributed environment, dynamic environment. So what happens when I am running multiple instances? How do I see the logs? So we'll see that again. So I'm going to run this. Now you'll see this Windows Azure Compute Emulator. This time you should see 2 different instances. This is a local emulator. I would have done this on Azure also, but to save on time, I'm running it on local environment. Okay, so it should run in here. So here, okay, something is wrong. Okay. Okay. So this is my home page. Just something broke in terms of JavaScript thing. I don't know. So it is running in here. Okay. Now here there are two instances because I made it two instances. You can see the 0th instance. It is and the first instance, second instance. So here the page is actually called on from this instance. It is not going to the 0th instance. Let me just run it again so that we don't have that problem of JavaScript. Sometimes it is not able to load in the local environment in the emulator when we increase the instances. So we just want to try running it again. This time I hope it should run all right without any I don't know, something wrong with okay, so I'm just refreshing this page, and as I continue, okay. So this time we should see multiple log entries in here. In 0, this time it went to the 0th instance. So now if I access the same URL from another browser, so it is kind of load balancing, which is load balancing done locally, just emulator actually, nothing much. You can see the 0th instance and first instance, both of them are getting load balanced calls. So that is the idea. Now let us see how it comes to where logs table. So go to the tables, let's see where logs table, and let us do it. It takes some time to get it updated here. So before it comes in here, let us see if I have anything in blob. Okay, let us see this. There's another container which it creates for IIS log files. If I had configured it for IIS, it will actually transfer my IIS crash done IIS log files for the IIS failed request or IIS log files. So one of the sample is this IIS log files. You can see in here. You can see this information which is coming through the IIS logs, which you can actually transfer to the blob. So very good mechanism of getting those files from virtual machine. Now, if you remember, the blob name which was given was where custom log container. Now here, we see this log file. Now it is coming from web role instance 1. Okay. In some time you will see if I have multiple logs created on another instance called as web role instance 0, you will see the entry for that also, separate files. So the sample is here. You can see this default page being loaded on this tab. So for multiple instances, you should see multiple files getting created. I just want to refresh it so that we would see multiple files getting created. Some JavaScript problem. I don't know. Okay, so I stop in here and then go back to the table, and let's see if I have any information in my where logs table. Okay, now here you would see some of the entries as instance 0 and some of the entries as instance 1, because I have two instances running, and that is where you see this. If I have 10 instances, you will see entry for every instance independently from 0 to 9. It all depends on the request. If the request has went to the 0th instance or first instance, they will log it according to their request processing. So this is distributed. So that is what we're talking about. Scalable because it is stored in the table storage, and which is very, very scalable storage in Azure. And then blobs, we are actually getting the independent files, where log files. And again, let us go back and see this where custom controller. Okay, now you see this where custom log container. I had given this name for the blob container where I should get these files. You will see 0th file now, file from the 0th instance. And then you have file from the first instance too. Okay. Okay, before we go back to the presentation, I just want to spend some time on this table structure. There is one more table called as WAD Diagnostics. WAD stands for Windows Azure Diagnostics. WAD Diagnostics Infrastructure. Now this table has entries logging about the infrastructure. So it is something to do with if the basic diagnostic infrastructure has any problem, it is going to log this in here. You see some of the now some of the entries here. Like successfully created the table, successful. So as I mentioned, some of the time the tables are not available there by default. So it will create those information, and this logging is done for the diagnostics infrastructure itself. Sometimes there might be some problem with the diagnostics infrastructure itself. So to get more information on that, we have to see this table called as WAD Diagnostics Infrastructure table. In the blob, we have this WAD control container, which we talked about already, which contains the information about this diagnostics settings configuration. Now, if you see here, there are two separate files for separate instances, and that is the idea. So when I say role instance, when I'm actually accessing the role instance, diagnostic manager, I'm going to get the respective configuration file for that specific role instance, so that it is scalable and they are independently modified. So you would see this information as of now, because I'm doing it through code, so it will have the default values, but that's the idea. We should also see here entry for mylogs. You would see this Azure emulator resource. This is actually the path for mylogs file, which we don't get access to, which is dynamic file, which is dynamically created, and we get access through local resources. And I say this is the container name where we wanted to transfer it, and this is the quota which I had transferred. So this is nothing but the configuration which I had created in my code. So that's what we can see in here. I hope it is making sense with respect to the diagnostics monitoring thing. Okay, having said that, let us go back again here in our code, and I'll talk about few other diagnostics quickly. Okay, now this is file log. Now let us do the event logging. If I want to do the event log, I do the same thing. I say configuration.event log, data source add application, and this is the provider name. I could do anything. I can write any type of application event for that matter. And I'm saying here schedule transfer time and log label filter. Same thing. Infrastructure logs, very simple. This is about that WAD log, infrastructure logs table, and you just have to enable it. You just have to change the scheduled transfer period for that. And this is some of the advanced capture, advanced logging, which diagnostics monitoring, which you might want to do. For advanced features, what I did here is I'm actually storing a setting in my configuration file, just to make it simple. Okay. So here, okay, I'm just, I have commented it, sorry. So I'm just saying, if the capture server log is, by default is false, but if you want to make it, you can actually make use of this configuration setting, and you can say true. If I want to enable the crash dumps, very important point, because since this is happening, everything is happening in cloud, how do I get access to the crash dump? And diagnostics monitor is the only mechanism to get that. So you say crash dumps, that is a static class, and you say enable collection true, and then you add that into your configuration directives transfer. So all the crash dumps will get transferred. Then about performance counter. So what happens in the configuration, you have performance counters, and you can add the performance counter configuration. And you can keep adding what counter you want to monitor. For example, I'm saying the counter specified here is I want to monitor the percentage processor time, and then what is the sample rate? Sample rate means how frequently this log or this performance counter will be captured and then transferred. There are two different things. Sampling is how frequently it will capture it locally, and transfer is actually how frequently it will transfer to our Azure storage. So this sampling also a very important factor. We'll talk about it in the tips. So here, this is how most of the things which we have been doing in our Azure Docker applications also. Memory available bytes, then you have requests per second, etc. All this, and you say buffer quota in MB is 512, and that's all. This we have seen about local storage too. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. But before we go on, let us quickly cover. We have seen this diagnostics data, and we'll just trap this. We'll just map it to respective tables. So event logs will actually go to WAD Windows event logs table. Performance counter goes to this table. Azure logs goes to WAD logs table. Very important. Most of the tracings will actually go to this WAD logs table. And then we have seen this crash terms and IIS logs and etc. So very important considerations. We have to keep always in mind that is monitoring, and we have to keep the difference between monitoring, debugging, and troubleshooting. Volume of data, as it is going to create a lot of logs depending on the access of your application, number of users accessing it. We have to be considerate enough about transferring the data and where do I log it and where it should come to Azure storage. Reaction time, about how quickly you want to react to that. For example, if there are errors, okay, you would like to actually write some code on your in your applications, in that errors should be quickly send some SMS or email or something like that, some other mechanisms, or you could use some third-party tools which will actually monitor your logs and throw some events depending on the errors or criticality of that specific log. Very important consideration, cost, because everything is going to cost you here. Whatever storage you are going to use in Azure, specifically blobs and table storage, which is using this diagnostics monitoring, and the transactions which is done. For example, monitoring 5 performance counters every 5 seconds for 100 instances is going to cost you around more than $260 per month. Very, very important concept to remember, because performance counter generally generates a lot of data, huge data, a lot of counters, and then this has to be transferred to table storage. So including your transactional storage, it is going to cost you around $260. So we should be very, very careful about what we capture, what we configure for diagnostics, and what we transfer. PowerShell scripts. Windows Azure has a command lists called as Windows Azure PowerShell PS command lists, which are available on CodePlex. If you want, you can just access it, download it from there, and you can get use of that. You can use that, and you can access and make changes remotely. You can actually run it on your local machine with the certificates, subscription certificate. You can change the performance log, file-based logs, infrastructure log, whatever you want to configure. Diagnostics, exactly same thing what we did on where role start. We can do that in here also. Okay, looks like there are a lot of questions. We'll see the questions in a minute. Let me just close this off. Okay. Like in terms of not only about the basic log exceptions and logging,